Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to each and every one of you here to our very first virtual Glasgow Talks here with Visit Scotland. And as many of you will know, many supporters of the Chamber will know that this series is supported by the University of Glasgow's Adam Smith Business School and the Clydesdale Bank. So many thanks to our two partners for their continued support in this series and also for embarking on our very first virtual one with us. So before I introduce Malcolm, I just wanted to set the scene a little bit with some of the Glasgow scenarios around tourism and where we are kind of at, I guess, as a city. Prior to the virus, Glasgow was glowing, and its latest accolade was, of course, the world's leading festivals and events destination at the World Travel Awards at the end of last year. And that was followed quite quickly after that by the Glasgow Convention Bureau being awarded gold for the 14th consecutive year at the Meetings and Incentive Travel Awards, and the University of Strathclyde's TIC and the SEC were also recognised. So some really globally strong recognition there. And tourism is indeed one of Glasgow's key sectors, with over 32,000 jobs and with international visitation stats rising to the highest level in records in 2017. Then in the space of literally 2 months, decimation. It's been an emergency response mode, and the Chamber's been on the front line fighting for support through British Chambers of Commerce and Scottish Chambers of Commerce around funding and cash flow, particularly around parity for this whole agenda for business across the board, for clear and consistent guidance on reopening, and enabling factors for workforce such as transport, schools and childcare. The Scottish Tourism Alliance has recently published some industry research earlier this week, and of the 280 businesses that were surveyed, we're told that nearly 50% of businesses won't be able to retain any staff after May, and that's indeed this month, with nearly half of tourism businesses possibly not going to be able to survive at all. So it's particularly challenging times. So we're delighted to have Malcolm here today as the head of the ship of Visit Scotland. I certainly consider Malcolm to be one of the great titans of tourism, as I decided to call him this morning. He joined Visit Scotland in 2001 as Director of Marketing, and he was appointed to be Chief Exec in 2010. Prior to this, he had a highly prestigious marketing career working both internationally and in the UK around Diageo, Guinness World Records, Guinness in Africa, Nestle and Beecham's. In 2004, Malcolm was awarded Scottish Marketeer of the Year at the Scottish Marketing Awards. And in 2005, he was given recognition of an OBE for his services to tourism. Now, we're all very aware just how devastating it has been for the tourism and visitor economy sector as a result of this COVID crisis. And some of the elements of the sector are likely to be the last to be remobilised. It's probably quite reassuring to know that for the economic recovery for the sector and brand positioning work, that we have someone of Malcolm's experience at the helm to help Scotland and indeed support Glasgow to recover. We're delighted to welcome Malcolm, who's going to discuss the impact of the pandemic on the industry and how Visit Scotland's been working to ensure businesses are supported on the ground during this crisis. Please extend a very warm welcome to Malcolm Roughead.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Alison. Very kind words, and of course, such a tragic time that we're in. Just to put a little bit of national context around it, last year our forecast was that tourism would inject 11.4 billion in terms of day trips and overnight trips into the Scottish economy. And if you add in supply chain effect, so that ripple effect that goes down through the supply chain, that would be another 1.2 billion. So you can see just how devastating it is, not just in an economic sense, but also in terms of employment and people who have built up businesses over the years. They ploughed, the energy, their money, their talent into building those, and for it just to suddenly disappear almost overnight is heartbreaking stuff. Now, obviously, Visit Scotland has been involved. We are working along with the Scottish Government, enterprise agencies, the Scottish Tourism Alliance and the various trade bodies, chambers, FSB and others, to try and help businesses through this period as best we can. There's 4 phases that we look at. They respond to the crisis as it is. We then have to move into a reset phase, and I'll go through what those mean and what Visit Scotland's doing in each of those. Then on to a restart, and then into a recovery phase. The respond phase is effectively about information gathering and information dissemination. It's looking at the scale of the problem, advising ministers in terms of the downsides and the impacts, and also looking at mitigating actions as best as we can. From our own perspective, what we did was we waived our quality assurance fee immediately, because we could see that whilst in some cases it may be slightly small, the amount of money that was returned, but in larger businesses it made a bit of a difference. But we've also been working in terms of our events fora. Visit Scotland has an events directorate. Events Scotland is part of that. And whilst the sort of traditional tourism area is well represented in terms of having the Scottish Tourism Alliance and other bodies bringing in their thoughts and the actions that are required, the events industry itself is less covered in terms of advocacy. So what we've been doing over the last number of weeks through Event Scotland is hosting a number of event fora, where we're trying to pull together the issues that event organisers and also their suppliers are facing at the moment, and we're feeding that back into Scottish Government so that they're aware of the size of the problem. And I think, Alison, your words about how successful Glasgow's been in terms of not just business events but cultural events as well is very pertinent, and hopefully we'll be able to represent the people that make up the industry, that particular part of the industry in Glasgow, to Scottish Government colleagues. We've also been looking at getting information out through our own corporate website, which is visitscotland.org. Now, normally, visitscotland.org would have somewhere in the region of 40,000 unique users. We're sitting on about 200,000 at the moment. So you can see that people are going there, they're going there for the information. We're trying to keep that up to date on a daily basis. But also what we're now posting is market intelligence, looking at around the world, doing horizon scanning, pulling all of that together so that you can actually see what's going on in other markets as well. At the same time, with the Scottish Tourism Alliance, the Enterprise Agencies and Business Gateway, we reconstituted the Scottish Tourism Emergency Response Group, which effectively meets together to start planning through the different phases, and also we're able to share the information in the action plan. And there's an action plan that again you can link on to and have a look at the 4 phases and the activities that will take place, are scheduled to take place over the coming months. But the Scottish Tourism Emergency Response Group was actually set up for the first time in 2001 as a response to foot and mouth, and then picked up on the 9/11 tragedy. And then down the years, it's also been involved in looking at the tourism industry response to various things like avian bird flu, volcanic ash cloud from Iceland, terrorism, etc. So it's quite a well-worked mechanic which we were able to pull together very, very quickly and start pulling in information from all the various sources that are out there. On a weekly basis, we go out to 11,500 businesses, giving them an update, signposting to various funding opportunities or information that's coming through. Also, on a one-to-one basis, our industry relationship managers have been phoning individual businesses, primarily smaller businesses, and to date, we've been talking to over 2,000 of them. again, to get a feel for the issues that they face so that we can aggregate all of that and bring it back into Scottish Government and advise ministers. We're also working with the destination management organisations to feed out into the communities, because communities are absolutely essential. And of course, we need to make sure that they're part of the solution as we move forward. And our international teams have been in weekly contact with their key accounts across the globe. Again, reassuring them, giving them the information, looking at updates, but also finding out what's happening in their own markets. And that's allowed us to get a pretty good insight into what's going on in places like Spain, Italy, New Zealand, Germany, etc. And these are all key markets for us as we go forward, albeit not in the short term. The reset phase is the next, and there is obviously an overlap. They're not quite as sequential as it sounds, but the reset is very much about looking at the implications. And obviously today and on Sunday we'll get a little bit more clarity, one hopes, in terms of what coming out of lockdown will look like. But it's actually sort of saying to yourself, well, if we're still going to have to do physical distancing, well, what does that mean? What does it mean for the hospitality trade? What does it mean for aviation? What does it mean for people who use trains or public transport, for commuting, etc.? There's also other areas that will have implications on, like legal liability, employment law. Will all that change? Been some fantastic webinars by various organisations over the last few weeks looking at some of those implications. And I think the other aspect to all of that, of course, as I mentioned, is about community and consumer sentiment. So how do people feel? So we have an ongoing tracking system where we look at sentiment, looking at people's intentions to travel, we're looking at how confident they feel, what's uppermost in their mind before they want to travel. And right now, no surprise, it's about safety, it's about hygiene, and those are going to be absolutely key for the industry going forward in terms of reassurance. The third phase is when we start to look at a restart, and that's about getting the supply chain in line. So if you think about, aviation, you've got aircraft that need to be put back into place, you've got baggage handlers, you've got crew, you've got people working at the airport who all need to be in place. Likewise, if you're in hospitality, you're looking at bringing people back into work. Is it, the right thing to do to reopen at that particular stage? You're looking at capacity. Do we have the capacity to be able to open up? And how do we then do that when we move into the recovery phase? And I suspect that will be very much on a sort of slow burn basis. Just about every market in the world will tell you that it will start with people visiting friends and family, being able to get out and about into the countryside or onto the beaches, into the parks. That will then move into, we suspect, into the domestic leisure market, and then obviously day trips is part of that as well. And then over time, as confidence grows and we're aware of travel relaxation, what we will then see will be a re-emergence of the short haul market and also the long haul market, and possibly at the end of all that maybe major events, given the size and complexity of managing large crowds, but there may be restrictions on that. And likewise, conferences. Now, some of the good news is that we know that sentiment towards visiting Scotland is very, very strong, and we're picking that up on all the work that we do. We also know that a lot of people are postponing rather than cancelling visits and conferences and events. So the demand is there, but the challenge is actually to get through to the other side. and it's quite a startling statistic that Alison gave us at the beginning, that 50% of those surveyed, felt that by the end of May that they may have no staff left. So everything that we do right now is got to be about getting the industry to the other side, so that once the recovery phase starts, we can actually do it in a measured and also in a sustainable and inclusive way. So that's kind of where we are at the moment in terms of advice to industry, but also advice to potential visitors. We're out there obviously talking to the event organisers. There's a lot of stuff, and I'm sure those that are on the call here from the Convention Bureau will be able to tell you that whilst the impact on the number of business events, which is a huge strength of Glasgow's, has been massive. I think it's over 70 events have been cancelled. Actually, further down the line, the demand is still there. Glasgow is still very much seen as a place that people want to come to. So I think longer term, there is a lot of hope, but in the short term, it is very, very difficult. And listening to some of the stories that have been coming in, and speaking to individuals myself, it is heartbreaking stuff.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Malcolm. So for everybody who's joined us today's benefit, what I'm going to suggest that we do, because there are so many of you, which is great, is that we'd like to ask you, if you want to ask a question of Malcolm, if you could put it in the Zoom room chat. I'm not going to promise, depending on the volume of questions, I'm not going to promise that we're going to be able to get through them all, but what we will do is have a good crack at it. We're scheduled to go to 2:45. Malcolm and I spoke before this, and we're happy to extend it to 3 if that works for everybody, but let's just see how we go, shall we? So in the first instance, I'm going to ask you, if you've got a question, if you bring it in through chat. Any we don't cover, we will share with the Visit Scotland team, so make sure that you realise that your voice will be heard. So I'm going to just start with one question, or a couple of questions in the first instance. The first one is just leading off on where you kind of finished there, Malcolm, which is the importance of beyond me. Now, I totally appreciate that it's not your bailiwick in terms of the problem solving of how we get beyond we, but what else do you think could be done to help support businesses beyond me?
Well, I think what we've got to do is really understand the individual issues that the businesses face. So is it, it seems completely anomalous to me that actually it's more preferential for a business to stay closed than to open, because in terms of capacity management, it may well be that actually they're just going to open and lose money. Now, how do we address that? Is that through sort of through some of the grants and loans? And obviously there have been issues around getting money through the system, although that seems to be flowing through now. But I think we really need to understand what is it exactly that needs to be done, and that's where actually organisations like the Chambers and the Tourism Alliance and others are really important, because that's the information that's coming from the industry itself, and those are the people at the sharp end, and they're able to actually give sort of detailed analysis of the support that they require, and I think the faster that we get all of that together, and the quicker that we actually get that into ministers, because there's no doubt, the ministers actually get the size of this problem and they want to actually make a difference, but they've got to have the right information to hand so that they can take the right decisions.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, we did talk about air and the airports and the role of airports, I guess, so we're also quite interested to understand, how do you see airports and the airlines emerging from this whole environment that we're in at the moment, and what kind of changes do you think that you'll see coming through, and also what kind of sort of reframed role might airports play as we come through this economic recovery?
Well, if you look at the success of Scotland's tourism industry over the last few years, the growth has primarily come from international markets. So I'll only talk about tourism because obviously it's important for exports, it's important for business connectivity, etc. But the growth in direct connectivity with Scotland has been phenomenal, and it's opened up markets. It's allowed people to get to Scotland quickly, easily. The hub strategy that was followed, which was very much about the long haul market and North America, and sort of bringing people in through Dubai, through Turkish Airways, through Istanbul, up into Helsinki, etc., has brought fantastic benefits. So we can't afford to lose those, because they're very, very difficult to win. And too easy to lose. So a lot of the work that's been going on, obviously the airports are heavily involved in all of this, and we have a very close relationship with the airports in Scotland. But it's also about reassuring those airline partners that we are there, we're there, and we're ready to work with them, we're ready to support them. But it will take time, because, as you rightly say, it will change. So again, I come back to, what does that mean in terms of social distancing? I read somewhere that, if it carries on at 2 meters apart, you could be having a queue a kilometre long. What does it mean in terms of, testing at airports? I've also read about, sort of travel passports being mooted. So those are the kind of questions that need to be answered. But again, the expertise of the airports, they have dealt with crises before. They are experts in management flow, traffic management flows. So I think again, it's about making sure that their voice is heard, and we can feed that back in.
Right, okay. I think whatever you've just said has prompted a whole series of different questions. One from initially from Sarah Heaney, actually from the Chamber, saying, do you see any major opportunities or positives that you see coming out of this crisis for the sector?
Probably maybe three things. One, I think the use of technology has been forced upon us, I guess, in many ways. But I think what that's allowed people to do is actually get familiar with it, to use it. I suspect going forward, the workplace is not going to be the same again. AI is going to play a far greater role. I think there's a greater acceptance of technology and the role that it can play. I think the sense of community. Scotland is a relatively small place in population size, but the fact that all of these organisations, some of which I've been mentioning, have come together and work collectively, is not something that's been replicated in the same way in every market, put it that way. And I think there's a real kind of sense of ownership in terms of tourism. People, it's our country, we're all very proud of it, and we want to get it back on its feet. But I think also there's a real recognition about the role, and I'll go back to the role of communities. And communities have to own it, they have to be part of it, and they have to be part of the solution going forward, so that we don't go back to some of the issues that we had pre-COVID.
Okay, I've got another one here around supply chain and so on, which we talked about briefly, from Ben McCorkadale, saying that this is a really unusual situation where both supply and demand have been shrunk. So what does stimulating supply and demand at the same time look like to you?
I think it would look like success to me, Alison, if we could stimulate supply and demand. Again, it's back down to understanding what is the supply chain going to look like, because as much as we're talking about the devastation on the tourism businesses, other sectors are also suffering. So if all of a sudden we were just to open up the doors, would we have actually enough people to come in and declaims premises? Because there's going to be that demand all at the same time, so it has to be phased, and that allows those in the supply chain to get their own staffing levels up, to get their own people back and working, and also in terms of, you know, physical products to make sure that they can get enough in terms of supply, because the last thing you want there is a shortage of supplies.
Thank you. Okay, so Francis McCarthy's asking about, you know, how do you see the role of domestic tourism in driving the restart phase? And I think Glasgow's had some very interesting conversations already, and Anne-Riek might want to come in on that at some point too. But, you know, given the implications that we are going to have restricted movement for some time, particularly so that tourism's not seen as a disease carrier. And I think, you know, that language was used with me the other day, which is, you know, is quite abhorrent really when you think about it. But it's going to be increasingly important to get tourism offered right for the citizens and the community, as you say, first. So what kind of things do you think that we might see from this more community-based approach? And how do you think this is going to influence our international offer in the long run?
Well, I think it'd be quite interesting. You know, we've got the benefit of watching others who are coming out, you know, of lockdown to a certain degree. So in France, you know, you can travel within a radius of 100 kilometres of your home. Now, what will be interesting to see is how does that work? You know, will it be observed? Where are they going? What are they doing? Which will give you a bit of an indicator, along with the data that we've also got in terms of, as I said, you know, travel intentions. I do think the first places that people will want to get to will be the family and relative side of it, because it's fine, you know, so having video conferences and FaceTime, etc. But we are social animals, and you know, we do want to connect, you know, with our friends and relatives. But the domestic market, just interesting, grew 17% last year. So Scotland's always had a very strong domestic market. And I think just with the restrictions on potential international travel, people sort of waiting to see just how that pans out, developing their own confidence in terms of travelling. I actually think what you will see is people staying within the domestic market to begin with. On the international side, as I said, we know there is demand there. What was quite interesting is every Tuesday, we Visit Scotland, we call it Happy Tuesday. So we put out, you know, posts of lovely little sort of Highland coos, etc. And the last one that went out had 1.6 million views, and people were coming back in saying, can't wait to get back to Scotland. So there's almost like a conversation going on at the moment. People sort of saying, you know, I really miss Scotland, I want to get there. I was due to come this year, but I'm going to come back next year. And all of that is really helpful in terms of building a picture, in terms of the underlying strength of the proposition, albeit that, you know, they can't travel at the moment.
And just on the communities point, Karen Shaw here's asking, how do you think that communities can be supported in terms of welcoming tourists? Because that's obviously quite it's a different brief from coming at it with a different lens. Have you got any views on that?
Well, certainly, if you look at the 2030 strategy that you know, was launched at the Scottish Tourism Alliance conference just prior to this, communities were at the heart of that particular strategy, and it's very much about, you know, what are the benefits. I mean, the economic benefits are pretty clear to see, but I think we also have to look at what the social benefits are as well, and how communities can prosper. So they need to be part of the conversation around what sort of place do you want to be, what sort of place do you want to have, and what does that mean in terms then of amenities, and pointing out, you know, just how communities can benefit, because, you know, the amenities that we put in place for visitors are equally as valid as for local communities. So I think we need to get into this kind of hearts and minds scenario where actually, you know, they don't feel that tourism is done to them. They're actually part of that solution. And if you look at, you know, the local supply chain, it's absolutely fundamental. We're keeping small micro businesses alive, by being part of the community supply chain. So I think different communities will have different needs. They'll be at different stages, but they're all important, and they all have a huge role to play within the success of tourism going forward.
Thank you for that. Well, certainly the People Make Glasgow branding campaign, which, as you know, is all about the community, will be very much part of the core business from Glasgow Life's point of view in terms of how the city's discussing that. So that's very helpful. I'm going to bring in Mark Crothall from the Scottish Tourism Alliance. Alan, would you like to unmute Mark just to share a bit more information on some of the industry feedback, please?
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I can't hear you.
Sorry, I thought you were going to free flow. Normally you get you
waiting for your question, Alison.
Okay, no, I was just wanting you to kind of add some contribution to this in terms of the industry feedback that we've been talking about, the research, and also likely implications for the new strategy that was just published in March, of course, which is going to have to be looked at through a different lens, again, taking into account the COVID crisis.
Yeah, no, well, thanks very much. And I think Malcolm's summary is great. And I suppose first and foremost, we're working, as he said, very, very closely together in collaboration. And I think for the benefit of us all getting through this, that's the way it has to be. Yeah, a bit bizarre to be stood on a stage with the First Minister announcing a new strategy to 2030 on the 4th of March, and then the 5th of March, the world comes to a standstill. Not quite, but the relevance of, I suppose, the vision and the ambition of the strategy is very much still remains. Why shouldn't we still aspire to be a world leader in 21st century tourism and for being responsible and sustainable? And many of the priority areas that sit around that, the heart of that strategy of people, place, business and experience, again, are absolutely at the core of what we need to be doing to rebuild and recover and come out the other way. And the conversation around communities right now is again very, very pertinent. In some respects, yes, we are going to see failure. The risk to the workforce right now, figures of anywhere between 50 and 100,000 job losses in the hospitality sector alone across the country is the cliff edge that we're faced with. Doing all that we can to ensure there is the necessary longer term support for business is something that ourselves as the STA and colleagues, trade bodies, we're all saying the same thing. And at the UK level, I think it's important to realise that the industry is universal, and we're all pushing the same buttons. And the recognition of the importance to tourism in the wider economy is absolutely paramount. And I think if you talk about opportunity, I think there was a question there earlier around what's the opportunity. Well, we've shifted the dial maybe into the perception and the importance of tourism, and there is a chance now to recalibrate some of the challenges perhaps the industry was burdened with, and that dialogue is opened up. But first and foremost, we've got to protect a good number of businesses, and they range from restaurants in Glasgow who haven't received any relief at the moment other than furlough, and importantly a part of the Glasgow fabric and the Scottish fabric. So let's hope that money will come through in grant form, but the dependency of the Treasury responding to that ask is what we are now reliant on. So but we have to be confident. We've got a lot of engagement with our colleagues in Ireland, and learning from others I think is really important. And speaking with colleagues in Dublin only on Tuesday afternoon, they are not seeing anything of any recovery type whatsoever until certainly the autumn at the earliest, but with a lot of failure in between. But the important thing as well is that the industry keep engaging with us and others to just highlight what the challenges are and what the issues are, because if that's not shared, then it's very difficult to represent that and push the case and provide what support we can.
Thanks very much for that, Mark. Okay, so we've got one person with 4 questions. Malcolm, are you ready? So this is from Paul Bray, and he is asking a range of different things. Firstly, he's asking specifically what's Visit Scotland putting in place to stimulate demand for domestic travel in the UK? And I guess that kind of is a similar question to one flagged earlier. Let me just find where. No, can't see that. So if we just stick with this one, but it has been hinted at in another question about stimulating demand for domestic travel in the UK. In fact, it was Neil McCallum who was basically saying, do you actually think it's likely that we're going to be able to holiday in the UK this year at all? So that's the first question. I'll let you take that one and then I'll come back with the rest.
Yeah, we're currently what we are doing is very much through social media and digital channels. We have an overarching campaign called Dream Now, Travel Later. And the whole point about that is to keep people motivated around Scotland, enthused by Scotland, so that actually when they are able to travel, Scotland is top of mind. We will, and Vicky Miller, who's our Director of Marketing and Digital, is already looking at developing a domestic campaign. What we would like to do is to make sure that the narrative, the baseline narrative across all of the UK is the same. So we're not saying different things about safety, we're not saying different things about distancing, we're not saying different things about sanitisation, etc. But obviously the proposition for each of the devolved nations is very different, and you know, Scotland has many strengths, and those assets will definitely come to the fore. And we do have some ongoing, as I say, ongoing research where we're looking at, you know, what is it that people will be looking for when they're finally able to travel. And certainly at the moment, the initial feeling is, you know, that rural areas, countryside, islands, you know, self-catering is featuring very strongly. So we're trying to build up that whole picture across the whole of the country to look at where are the strengths, what is it that people are looking for, and then go back to working with the local destination management organisations. What we can then do is start to segment that market down into capacity and capability, and that will give us an indicator in terms of what the scale of that will be. Now that's ongoing. It's a kind of moving feast because we can plan for autumn, and it might be that actually we can't go live in autumn. We can plan for November, that might not work either, which is why I'm saying, you know, the sooner that we start to realise or understand what the exit from lockdown looks like, the firmer we can make those plans.
Thank you for that. There's a couple of questions about skilling and returning to work. So one specific question is around, you know, the different changes that are required by businesses, and what opportunities are there for the workforce to get upskilled to cope with some of these changes. And I think it's also been reinforced here from Gordon McIntyre from the City of Glasgow College in terms of huge increase in unemployment is expected. Our young generation is going to take an enormous hit, which I know we're all very keen to do everything we can to combat. Do you think it's possible the government might amend funding opportunities for individuals to participate in training and upskilling?
Well, just to answer that one, I know through Skills Development Scotland there's been a lot of work ongoing, and also again actually through Mark and the Scottish Tourism Alliance, you know, they've been looking at job opportunities, and I think if you go on to the Alliance's own website, you know, you can get a link through to job matching, which actually allows people to move from one discipline to another. I know also from other conversations that we've been having that innovation and education are absolutely fundamental to the general economic recovery of the country, not just within tourism. So there's a lot of focus at the moment on how can we stimulate education, training, development, and then ultimately innovation within the country, if we want to get the economy moving again. Because to not invest in your future is the worst thing that we can actually do.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I think there are some questions about enabling businesses to plan better, having a clearer understanding of times of opening and stuff. But I think at this particular point in time, we're probably within a few days of actually getting much greater clarity on that. So I won't put you in the spot on that one, because I'm sure that nobody really has a definitive answer apart from those that are about to give us the answers. One thing that's being talked about is the physical distancing point. Now, 2 meters is what's kind of being talked about, but who seem to be talking about 1 meter, and some other countries have looked at that. Do you have a position in that, or are you getting any soundings about positioning on that? Because managing access to any of the sites or facilities or accommodation providers, it's going to be very challenging on lots of different levels, but with that amount of space. You got any views?
And that's exactly what the type of thing that gets fed in, you know, because that has huge implications in terms of configuration of you know, bars, restaurants, hotels, travel. So you know, if it's going to stay at 2 meters, then we need to know soon. If it's going to be relaxed, then, you know, again, we need to know that soon, so that all of these businesses and transport providers can actually make arrangements. I mean, these things can't just happen overnight, you know. So I think whether it's 2 meters or 1 meter, I mean, all we can do is follow the guidelines that were given by Scottish Government and their experts. I wouldn't know whether 1 meter or 2 meters is best. You know, ideally, we wouldn't actually have to worry about that, but obviously we are going to have to worry about that, and we're going to have to address it. But it will take quite a shift in terms of, you know, moving the way that we used to work to the new way that we're going to have to work.
Okay, I think Mark might be able to kind of give a little bit of insight in terms of some of the specific business guidance, which might help respond to a couple of the questions that have been cited. Mark, can I bring you back in again?
Yep, sure. So as part of the STIRG process, which Malcolm referred to earlier, one of the things is about, you know, what does that guidance look like? So again, at a UK level, various sector groups are taking forward recommendations on what the protocol should be and the right standards, so to the health and safety communities. Now, there's a huge number of best practice out there and learnings we can take from other organisations. You look at Merlin from an attraction level, the big brands, brand operated hotels. The British Retail Consortium have just published some great guidelines already, which have been supported by the unions, who I think will have a huge part and a huge voice in all of this. So I know many businesses have been asking us, what do I do? How do I go about it? What's right? What's wrong? And going back to what Malcolm was saying earlier, until we know and have more clarity, difficult to say that, but rest assured that there is a lot of work that's happening that will come out at the end of the day with a recommendation that this is what you should at very least be doing. And then because of the types of businesses that we operate, it'll then be, you know, into the organizations themselves to apply themselves as best as they can within those parameters. But across the different sectors of the industry, whether it be adventure to hotels, restaurants, all different types, guidance will be, or recommendations will be coming very, very soon. So we are ready, but likewise, we've also said there needs to be a UK approach to that as well, so it's consistent, because a lot of the operators work across both countries, and again, from the customer's point of view, that's important that they have a familiarity as well. So absolute, you know, working together piece, north and south of the border is where things are on that front.
Thanks, Mark. So just as we're going to get into the wrap-up point, I think we've covered most of the questions, and as I said at the beginning, we will make sure that all the questions are fed into Visit Scotland, so fear not, your voice will be heard. I guess aside from ensuring that tourism and the visitor economy continues to be recognised and seen as relevant, a very relevant driver to Scotland's economy, from your perspective, what do you think Glasgow and its business community could do specifically in terms of this sector?
Well, I think carry on doing what they were doing in terms of working together as a community. Clearly, tourism is part of the economic plan for Glasgow, so that's fantastic. Peter Lederer represents tourism on the group that I think Jim McDonald chairs. So I think that joined upness that's there is absolutely key to future success. I think the proposition that Glasgow's developed down the years has been very strong. You mentioned People Make Glasgow, and I think if maybe that had been shifting a little bit with time, I think it's going to be right back in the centre again. People do understand that it is about the people of the city, but it's also about investing. I think there's some fantastic opportunities that are out there. You look at the SEC and the success that's had. You look at the Technology Innovation Centre there, not that far from your offices, which again has been a fantastic success. You look at the strength of the universities, which, let's not forget, pull in international students, and then of course on the back of that you get the families coming over, etc., and they're fantastic ambassadors. And the strength of the conferencing market, which again you outlined just how successful Glasgow Convention Bureau has been, rightly, and again I think you will see that people understand. People, when they're booking these conferences, what they understand is the capability of Glasgow in delivering these, and we've seen that down the years, big events like the Commonwealth Games, etc. So Scotland generally, and Glasgow in particular, has a reputation for delivering, and it's got a reputation for excellence. And I think we need to remember that it is tough times at the moment, but actually those are underlying strengths of the city, and the city has always been a resilient city. And it will bounce back. There's absolutely no doubt about that.
I'm seeing Karen Shaw's asking a good question here at the end around climate change. So that's something that's been commented on quite widely across the board, I guess, in terms of reduction of pollution as a result of this pandemic, and that the environment is indeed benefiting. So I mean, I suppose 2 months ago we were all absolutely in the front line about climate crisis, and now we're in the front line about a pandemic crisis. So he's asking, what do you think that there's going to be a fundamental change in people's behaviour regarding air travel and sustainable tourism as a result of this?
Well, I think if I start with just generally with sustainable tourism, again, that was writ large in the 2030 strategy, and that came from industry, but it also came from consumer sentiment. So there was a real move towards responsible tourism. And I think actually what this is probably going to do is accelerate that. And what we can't do is go back to the old norm and clog up our streets, etc. So I think if we really grasp this opportunity, I actually do think that we can move that agenda along a lot faster than perhaps we anticipated within the 2030 strategy, actually.
Good. Well, that can only be positive in the face of absolute adversity that we find ourselves in. So I'm going to just ask you one more question, which is actually around the national economic recovery plans. And as many of us know, Benny Higgins is chairing an advisory group on economic recovery for Scotland. It's also been supported by Professor Sir Anton Muscatelli from the University of Glasgow here. And Benny actually joined the Scottish Tourism Alliance Board on Tuesday earlier this week to just discuss what he's doing and his intentions. And it was very clear partway through the conversation that it's not about the emergency response, the work that he's leading. It's about the big, bold economic recovery stuff longer term. And he's been very specific in his ask for killer ideas and interventions. And he needs all of this before the end of May, because he's got to publish at the end of June, which is in parallel with the Chief Economic Advisor, Gary Gillespie's scenario planning work. So, difficult question, but have you got any particular perspectives on what you think Glasgow could be doing in response with the tourism sector for that ask?
I think it's probably, for that ask, I think it's probably a national question, to be honest with you, Alison. It's a difficult one to answer. Things that spring automatically to mind are, will we have the right conditions in place to stimulate growth? So you've asked about skills, you've asked about employability. All of those, a skilled workforce is going to be absolutely fundamental to growth. There are other stimuli, opportunities. Off the top of my head, I'm thinking about the VAT, for example. I mean, we're one of the highest VAT-rated countries in Europe, so you could certainly stimulate competitiveness in terms of that. You could get quite creative on APD, which would certainly, I think, motivate the airlines to make sure that they see Scotland as a viable destination in terms of profitability. Now, you can reduce that. You actually have to have it, as I understand it, because it's a European thing, but you can actually zero rate it. So, being a wee bit creative around how you use some of the legislation that's in place. You have things like the package travel regulations, which are constraints in the sense that, if businesses want to get together, and offer, combined product proposals, then they effectively end up operating as a tour operator with all the liability that comes with that. So if that could be loosened, that allows people to collaborate more without necessarily having to take on board, the travel obligations, then I think, I think what that would do, you go back to what can we do to make Glasgow more interesting? Well, you can join all the bits up so that actually, you've got a kind of Glasgow ticket that people are able to buy without having to knit it all together themselves. Integrated transport, I think, again, across the country, lots of particularly international visitors get a bit confused as to why they can't just buy a single ticket. So I think an oyster type approach for the whole of Scotland would be great if that's possible. And it's all about convenience, and being able to transact online. Again, there's too many businesses across the country who are not online bookable. So given that 80% of all travel is booked online, we're behind the curve on that one. So again, I go back to the bit that I mentioned about technology. If anything coming out of this, if we're much more comfortable about technology, then let's use it and use it to become much more competitive.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed. Well, we've covered a great deal of ground in a very short period of time, so I'm very grateful to Malcolm for that, and for the various questions that have been asked. I think probably want to just sum up by saying, it's really reassuring to hear that there's reinforcement in terms of the Glasgow approach prior to this, and also the ability of the city to really lead from the front as a city destination, particularly in terms of its experience of working together as a community, the collaborative effort, strong vision, major anchors like the SEC and the TIC in terms of the events proposition, as well as the very strong cultural offer that the city has. So that's very encouraging. We will certainly, as a chamber, be continuing the work to make sure that the industry information is flowing in from a city point of view into the system, and it's good to know that you and your organisation are actually doing that direct into government, specifically around events, and if we can add to that, we will, with Glasgow Life. I think it's also really helpful to just get a bit of a steer in terms of your own inside thinking about the stage process and what that means for the various elements of the market, and as best you can, the timing of that and the implications of all of that. And I know that most of the people that are in this audience will be very concerned with making sure that they are going to still be functioning after the end of May. And as we said earlier on, I know that that's with other civil servants, if you like, in terms of making the decisions for funding and making the funding accessible as quickly and as seamlessly as possible. So thank you very, very much indeed for that. I'd also like to just say a couple of things at the end, which is, you know, the pace of change is just ridiculously quick at the moment. So, you know, last week you're discussing furlough, the next week you're discussing the emergence of another grant offer. So the ability to be able to respond, I think, has been very important, particularly around securing the cash flow advantage. And it's very, very often with an SME bias, but all businesses, as you know. So we've been doing weekly webinars with our Chief Exec on a Wednesday afternoon at 3, and everybody's very welcome to join those. That's where Stuart gives an update from his vista as a board member of British Chambers of Commerce, and through the role we have with British Chambers, it's been directly influencing the Chancellor. So I would encourage everybody to attend those if they possibly can, if you want to know more. But also on our own website, we've got a coronavirus hub, and that's updated regularly again, reflecting the pace on business advice, support available, and the latest news. So definitely keeping up at the pace, but doing our very best to represent our members in the business community here in the city. On a much more buoyant level, we're also trying to make sure that we're raising awareness of really good stories where businesses have been helping other businesses and sharing that. And I'd encourage you to share your stories with us, please, under hashtag Inspiring City. It's a proposition that we've had for the last few years. Around September time, we have an annual event with the Herald Inspiring City Awards. We're looking at that differently, as you might imagine, this year, but we're certainly at the moment doing our very best to gather all that case study material of our members in the business community to share some of the good stuff that's happening. So it's 3 o'clock. I promised I would finish at 3 by stealing an extra 15 minutes of everybody's time. So I just would like to extend a very warm thank you to Malcolm again for joining us today, to our sponsors, the University of Glasgow, Adam Smith Business School and the Clydesdale Bank, and indeed to every single one of you who have taken your time out of another space in your house to come and join us today. It's been really good to see such a strong turnout, and we're very grateful to you all for doing that. So thank you for taking the time to connect, and I wish you all a good day as you finish your day.